this particular budget, he would have wished for it to have been 2 trillion, to have been consolidated to that particular figure. So I'll start with you, Honorable Oluoch. How do you see this particular figure? Do you think it's too ambitious, as some of the leaders have put it?
It is ambitious to the extent, I think, that we are living in a very depressed economy already before the COVID situation. Ambitious also to the extent that our revenue collections have not been up to par in the last 3 financial years that have been in Parliament.
Even without COVID-19.
Even without COVID-19. And that can be demonstrated by the different supplementary budgets that we've had. So we've had budgets presented, and then a supplementary budget brought in saying, look, we cannot raise this revenue, we've had these shortfalls, so we have to go back to this.
Yes.
So maybe it is time, and this argument has been made over and over again, and I think it's time that maybe Treasury looked at it, that if all we can do is a budget of 1 or 2 trillion, let's do 1 or 2 trillion. And then if Treasury or KRA surprises us and puts in more revenue collection, I would rather we do a supplementary budget to say we've raised more money, so we want to factor this into an expanded budget appropriation position. So I think that is a fair comment to say that we are putting in a budget that we are not able to raise revenue for.
Especially hoping, well, if we are being pessimistic, if this situation, COVID-19, is extended, then the situation might not be better. Honorable Kangata, what do you make of the sentiment that this is an over-ambitious budget? Some of the leaders that have responded to it would have wished for it to have been a lower figure because projections show that the revenue collection won't be as much as has been expected, were it not to be for the COVID-19 in the country.
Thank you. Let me say that no, it is not an overambitious document or budget.
Yes.
Reason being that you have very few items that you can knock off from the budget. Take, for instance, education. It is the largest recipient of intended funds. You cannot really think around that budget. Reason being, some of the items provided there were negotiated with the teachers. We do have legally binding, what we call a collective bargaining agreements with teachers. So unless you're proposing that we violate those agreements and we don't pay teachers as per the agreement that was entered between the union and the government.
Right.
You look at other items like health. You need to provide something for health now that we have this problem of COVID-19 pandemic. You look at infrastructure. If you want this country to grow, you need to set aside monies for roads. Most of these roads projects, in any event, had already been commenced. So you have to set aside some funds to complete those projects. So in totality, I am not so sure whether we could have come up with a better budget. For me, this is a budget that takes into account the current situation. And for me, I think it's a good budget.
All right. And now, speaking of health, you have mentioned that, and it's quite important that we focus on that because of the current situation in the country. We were told that 1.7 billion shillings was set aside for that particular sector, and this is meant for 5,000 additional health workers that are to be hired, and far from that, we're going to have 20,000 beds, I think much needed given the circumstances in particularly remote hospitals in the country as well as in the urban areas. And we'll have, of course, 50 walk-through sanitizers at border point. And if you're trying to envision what walk-through sanitizers, you can picture the situation at the ferry way in Mombasa, whereby we had people walking through a sort of gate that would have them sprayed with a sanitizer. Now, this is quite important, and this has been touted as one of the winners. How does this sit with you, Honorable Oluoch?
Yes, as I answer that question, I just want to rebut a little bit on the issue of we couldn't have come with a better budget, and there are areas that, just in 1 second, I think there are areas we probably could have put a moratorium because living beyond our means, when consistently you're doing a supplementary budget, last year we had 2 supplementary budgets.
Yeah.
Clearly we are living outside of our means. You can't
Yes.
make budgets like that.
What areas would these be?
In my view, because living beyond our Nini and doing a budget like this means that we are only going to increase the debt. I think at a time when you're not at war, we probably should be thinking, what can we do about the security sector? Investment in defense, in the military. Did we need to do that? I think it's an area that we need to look at very clearly. The second area, which is also an area that we could have looked at, I think is the area of infrastructure.
Okay.
We need to do development, but could we have said that for the next 2 financial years, so that we spend the money we are putting on infrastructure on reducing our foreign debt, we put a freeze on new infrastructural projects and only put in money for the ones that are going on.
Yes.
And then lastly, I think we need to look at whether there is in our budget duplication. Health is a devolved function. To what extent is the government putting money and the county also going to put money at the same time?
But for proponents of, let's say, the Big Four agenda, that would be something that they will be quite at odds with, particularly when you look at infrastructure and certain and other areas. Don't you think these are also important? And when you speak of we are not at war, I think for any country, slashing their military budget is quite a tall order anywhere in the world. Would you have the country go in this particular direction, given the sensitivities that we have and perhaps the situation on the border with Somalia and even beyond?
I think I would go for a minimalist budget.
Okay.
To the extent that the military needs to have at the moment and the security sector just enough to be able to operate without investment into new technology, equipment, acquiring the latest jets and the latest G this and G that 7 and that kind of thing. I think we need to go for a minimalist budget. What is enough for the military to operate at the moment without getting into new technology? So having said that, I think we need to evaluate that and then seal the loopholes that we are looking at in terms of having a tight budget so that we don't live beyond our means.
All right. Now, in the interest of time, I'd like us to talk about health, and please make it brief so that we can have both sides, yours and Senator Kangate's. What do you make of the allocation that was given to the health sector, given what is happening with COVID-19, its spread, and the needs that have been made so loud, particularly by unions such as KMPDU?
I think budget for health was about 115 billion. I think they have put in more money in terms of recruitment of more health workers. But I think the one thing that I would have wanted to see is to ensure that county governments also immediately follow up with their own budget so that we are able to see how much of the money that we appropriated to the counties is going to be able to go to augment the government effort. It's very sad that you have a county like Siaya being said to be having only 10.
With 9 already occupied.
With 9 already occupied. So I think the thing that ought to come out of this, that after COVID, post-COVID, this situation should help us to be able to have uplifted the standards of our hospitals, our level 4s and level 5s and referral hospitals, so that public health beyond COVID-19 is at another level.
Absolutely. Senator Kangata, what are your views on the allocations given to the health sector?
Well, of course, they are, for me, I see an improvement. I've seen the allocation is about 111 billion. That to me is a huge increment when you compare this allocation and the allocation that was done to that ministry the last financial year. But also remember, we have also devolved almost 316 billion shillings. Health remains a devolved function.
Absolutely.
So you combine whatever that will be done by the county together with 111 billion that has been allocated to the health ministry. To me, you can tell this government is doing a brilliant job in making effort to improve our health services. We do expect that the governors will exercise their discretion and allocate more funds to health. It is the most important thing that we are now tackling going forward for the next 1 or 2 years. Of course, there have been several instances where governors fail to devolve or rather allocate more money to health. To me, that is not positive, but that is best left to governors and members of the county assembly. For the government at the national level, it has made a good effort to allocate at least 111 billion to the health sector.
Right. Now let's shift gears to the agricultural sector, one of the major pillars of our economy. 7.9 billion shillings has been put for this, and we are having investment for small-scale farmers, expanding irrigation endeavors, subsidies for farm inputs, and horticultural farmers to enable them to actually access international markets, because these are what the major recipients of their work and their products. What do you make of this? Is it enough? Do you think this will enable the economy actually to pick itself up, particularly given that we have suffered in the wake of COVID-19, the closure of our ports of entry, as well as, you know, the locusts that have been ravaging our country and our farms?
Once again, you must take into account, just like health, agriculture is devolved under fourth schedule of the Constitution of Kenya.
Yes.
Meaning the national government is just supplementing efforts of the counties. The primary entities that needs to address this issue of agriculture remains the counties. Be that as it may, the national government has decided to supplement those efforts. And to me, those amounts, they are good. It's a good start. It can provide a good starting point vis-a-vis the allocations that were there in the last financial year.
And what do you think of this, Honorable Alwatch?
I think I would look at this in terms of look at what's the combined allocation of water, environment, and agriculture. And I think when you're looking at agriculture, you need to be able to look at it combined. And I think the total here would be close to about 10 billion.
Absolutely.
Both being devolved functions. We have had irregular rain patterns. We have floods that are disrupted our agriculture, and there was need for us to be able to cushion. I think one of the things that have been done here is to subsidize, and these subsidies I think will go a long way. But I think then it boils down to the counties to whose docket this actually belongs. We need to get to the point, and this suggestion has been made over and over again in the National Assembly, so that we make provision in the Constitution and in law that county governments must departmentalize and put specific portions.
Yes.
For example, agriculture, so that we don't leave it to the discretion of the county government and say this % of money will go into agriculture, this will go into health, so that there is equity and continuity in terms of how much we put in every sector. But I think overall, the national government, especially this being a devolved function, has allocated enough money.
Yes, but then there are sectors that seem to have been ignored. When you look at the sugar industry in Western and Nyanza, it seems to be on the losing side as far as this budget is concerned. What do you make of that seeming omission?
There is a task force that the government came up with. I think it was Governor Paranya who was holding that task force. I think the report already was presented to the president.
Yes.
There was a time when the president was in Central Province and the question came up, and I think his answer was that he was waiting for the task force. We should hope, because I have seen Senator Ochilo Ayako raise this over and over again, and the leaders from Nyanza Province have also raised this. I think it is a concern. We need to be able to cushion and come up with something around and I think the second other issue is to find out how much are we spending in terms of the floods control. There is a Solukoin Dam, which is a constant thorn in the flesh, and has been touted as one of the ways in which we can be able to control the floods, generate electricity, generate employment, and increase productivity.
Absolutely.
In that area. And only 500 million was allocated here.
Yes.
And that is one thing that was going to boost agriculture and even sugarcane, because if you're talking about revival of sugarcane in that area, we cannot concentrate or focus on rain-fed agriculture and sugarcane production. We need to be able to harness this, and I think we could have put in a lot more money on Sony Koruso in dam.
Yeah, so, Senator Kangata, the stakeholders in the sugar sector will not argue with the fact that it seems unfair that it has been actually ignored in this particular budget. What do you make of this, and do you think it is justified that it is not featuring prominently perhaps in this particular year's financial year's budget?
Yeah, when you look at the various allocations to the sugar sector over the years, for me, a lot of money has been pumped into that sector. It has not been revived, but I don't blame the government in terms of efforts, in terms of pumping money. The government has made every effort to allocate funds to that sector. In fact, I think, in my own humble view, the problem does not lie with the government inadequate funding of the sector. The problem is in governance. We either completely privatize the entire value chain, or alternatively, we come up with very robust governance mechanisms. Otherwise, we will fall into a major trap of just sending money, and that sector will be, it will not work.
But the task force that Honorable Oluoch has actually talked about, headed by Governor Oparanya, did give recommendations on how to handle these problems. But and according to NC Party leader Musalia Mudavadi, these were seemingly ignored. How does that sit with you?
I disagree with the idea that the government disagreed with the recommendation of the task force. It appears there was no consensus in terms of the recommendations that were done by my brother Oparanya. I saw some farmers vehemently opposed to those recommendations.
Right.
Maybe that is the reason why the government is yet to adopt all those recommendations. But I'm also aware that some of those recommendations have also been passed, have been taken into account. Remember, there are many sectors in this country.
Yes.
We have those of us who come from central Kenya. We have passion for tea. We have passion for coffee. We have passion for milk. There are problems in those sectors. Same way, you go to places like Kisumu, the fish farmers have issues.
For sure.
You go to coastal region, you find the same problem. I think, in my own opinion, some of the solutions lie with the governance, taking into account agriculture remains almost a fully devolved functions. When you see national government making effort to intervene in those sectors, it is just doing that to supplement the primary role that has been bestowed to the county governments.
Now, far from that, let's talk about manufacturing. This is one of the areas that has been expected to help build the Kenyan economy, and it was pumped with 600 million shillings for buying locally assembled vehicles. This has been an area that a lot have hoped would actually get that particular boost, and then, of course, 712 million for loans for MSMEs. But at the same time, importers have been slapped with 25% taxation. This is particularly with leather imports. Now, what do you make of that? Are they trying to strike a balance, and would this actually help improve the manufacturing sector in the country?
The idea of coming up with import duties is to discourage Kenyans
from importing
these goods, more expensive compared to locally assembled goods in that line. And therefore, to me, that was a positive thing. Remember, about 2 months ago, government came up with a raft of measures, which remain in force to support local entities, including the local manufacturers. A good example is the reduction of the VAT. I think VAT has been one of the major hindrances in local manufacturing capacity. It is now at 14%. Remember, we have also done away with taxing people who earn 24,000 and below. Most of those people are the ones who go to industrial area to do such kind of work. Remember, we have come up with other measures, reduction of the corporate tax. So there are several measures which have been done, and in my own opinion, manufacturers need to take into account and leverage and make Kenya a competitive hub of industries. I was fearful this budget may undo some of those measures, but I'm happy none were touched, and that to me is progress. The manufacturers need now to take advantage of this and run away. Remember also there was support in the energy sector, those who do bulk consumption of energy. There has been incentives to ensure that they consume cheap energy. Reason being, one of the reasons why local manufacturing industry has been uncompetitive in comparative terms is the high cost of energy. It remains cheap now, and we should be seeing local manufacturers taking advantage of that. A good example of efforts which are bearing fruits in the local manufacturing industry is the continuing collapse of cement prices. For the last several years, one bag of cement has been costing about 700 shillings or about 800. Currently, you can get cement as cheap as 400 shillings per bag. That to me is progress. It shows efforts that the government has been doing to promote local cement manufacturing industry has been positive.
Absolutely. Senator Kangata, thank you for those sentiments. But at the same time, when you are discouraging people, or rather people in certain sectors, business persons in certain sectors from, importing, there are reasons why they would rather import leather from Kenya, or rather, get leather from Kenya rather than import it from Ethiopia. It could be a quality question, it could be a price question. So while we are imposing certain taxes, Honorable Olwach, do you think we need to deal with the root measures? He has talked about the cement industry. We have one of the biggest investors in cement, Aliko Dangote, shying away from Kenya because of some issues such as corruption. So while we are trying to balance, how are we dealing with the root issues?
Yeah, I think we need to deal with the business environment so that issues of corruption and governance, the tax regimes and business licensing regimes, I think those are issues that we need to look at so that we do not discourage people who want to do business here. But at the same time, there is a certain level at which we need to strike a balance so that we are protecting our own people within our industry. And I think that might have been the reasoning, for example, for the allocation of the 600 million. But the question that I want to ask is, what is the impact if we wanted to protect local assembly? 600 million. I'm not so sure the impact that it will deal with. We also need to consider what is the population of people who depend, consume these, and who benefit directly or indirectly from this locally assembled industry. I would myself perhaps have put together the 600 million and the 700 million and put it to save the sugar industry. Allow me to go back there. if I was to put, for example, 1 billion so that we save the sugar industry, and I know Senator Kangata has raised some governance issues that must be addressed. Do we need to privatize? And there is push and pull. The government is leaning more towards privatization and saying, let's consolidate Chemelil Sugar, Muhoroni Sugar, and Kibos and have one productive unit. And let's have the Sony Sugar perhaps with another. So those are governance issues that need to be. But in the meantime, we needed to put in money to save them as they are so that they don't grind to a halt. And I would have put this 600 and 700 million and taken it perhaps to the sugar industry. In
that direction. So because we've run out of time, it's a very elaborate budget. We wouldn't be able to analyze the whole of it. But just to give you a general closing remarks, I'll start with you, Senator Kangata.
Yeah, for me, this is a budget which has been made under very difficult circumstances. We have had diminishing or reducing incomes. The tax collection by Kenya Revenue Authority has been falling. And therefore, the government had to take bold measures, come up with austerity budget, notwithstanding that we still need to move ahead and develop despite all this problem that we are having. every arm of government is losing money, whether executive, whether the legislature, or even the judiciary. This is important because I have seen some people saying, "Oh, we are targeting a judiciary.
Yeah.
Judiciary is not getting enough money." No, even us, those of us who are in the leadership of the National Assembly and the Senate, there are various items we have been compelled to cut down. Otherwise, we can't really be able to fund. So therefore, I think every Kenyan should understand we are living in hard times. President Uhuru Kenyatta is making every effort to ensure Kenyans live comfortably. He has done a very good job in coming up with a budget that is going to cushion Kenyans against the negative effects of COVID-19 pandemic. We are faring better in comparison to our neighbors like Tanzania, and therefore we should be lauding the president for the good work he's doing.
Okay, thank you very much. Honorable Olot, what do you feel, what are your closing remarks as per the budget?
A very difficult budget to make, balancing, ensuring that things are normal, operations of government continue. I would put in more emphasis on the economic stimulus package as one of the main things that came out of this. And initially when the budget came, Treasury did not seem to think that a budget needed to be done that reflect the realities of COVID, the floods and other things. So when they came back with a balanced budget that had this, I think it had my support because, for example, they have now put in money to try and put in things that cushion our young people, for example, the Kazi Mtaani. And I think it's employing people there and putting money into circulation. I should hope that the money that they have put in education for the assembly of 11,000, the desks and about recruitment of 11,000 interns, I hope then that this also puts in money into circulation in the hands of people, and of course also on environment and other areas. Also on infrastructure, the money that they have put in terms of rehabilitation of roads and access to roads will ensure that young people are able to do these roads, put money into circulation, and I hope that small contractors and small medium enterprises are able to get this so that we are able to bring back the economy back to its feet. And lastly, I think that going forward we need to put a budget that we can be able to fund in terms of the revenue that we collect and put more focus into trying to reschedule our debt and also to decrease our appetite for borrowing.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Senator Irungu Kang'ata, as well as Mathare Member of Parliament Anthony Olot, who happens to be a lawyer as well. Thank you for your sentiments on the budget. We're going to take a short break. On the other side, we have Brian Eseli, who